Hello, welcome once again. In this video, we'll see what is the meaning of the words amplitude, period, frequency, and axis for a sine curve. We know that a sine curve is formed when a point moves along a circle like this. As the point starts from this position, the P is at the 0 degree, and as the point C moves, the P reaches the maximum, and here the point P is at the minimum, and once it completes one full rotation, the point P is at 2 pi radians on the sine curve. So this is the basic idea about the sine curve. But what are we going to do here? We are going to find out what is meant by amplitude, what is meant by period, what is meant by frequency and axis. Let's first deal with what is meant by axis. Now you can see a blue line here. As I move the blue line, what happens? The whole curve moves up or down along the line. And as the point C moves along the circle, the point P also moves up and down, but you can notice that the position of the point P above and below are symmetric about the blue line here. So this blue line is actually the axis of the sine curve. The axis of the sine curve actually runs through the middle of the sine curve. The sine curve is symmetric about the axis, up and down. And what is amplitude? You can notice that when the C is in this position, the point P reaches its maximum position, and when the C is in this position, the point P is at its minimum position. And you know that because blue line is the axis, this position and this position are at the same distance from the axis, and this distance from the axis is called the amplitude. That is, the distance of the maximum or minimum from the axis is called the amplitude of the sine curve. So how does it change? Now if I change the radius of the circle, you can see that the maximum and minimum also changes. In this case, the radius is 3 and the minimum is at -3, and the maximum will be at +3. Therefore, the distance from the x-axis, in this case x-axis is the axis of the sine curve. So the maximum distance from the x-axis to the maximum point is 3, and the distance from the x-axis to the minimum point is 3, and this maximum distance, that is the maximum or minimum distance from the axis, is called the amplitude of the curve. Now let's move on to what is frequency and period. They are interrelated actually. So the frequency is the number of full cycle that happened for one full rotation. So one full rotation, it starts from 0 as we said and moves on up to 2 pi. So that is when the cycle ends. It starts at 0, goes up, goes down and ends at 2 pi. This is one full cycle. So period is the time taken for one full cycle. In this case, the period is 2 pi. Now, if I change it something like this, you can see that there are 1, 2 cycles until 2 pi, which means the frequency here is 2. So up to 2 pi, you have 2 full cycles. Therefore, the frequency of this sine curve is 2. Now, what is period? What is the amount of the angle taken for one full cycle? So if you start from 0 and then if you go on to one full cycle, it ends at pi. Therefore, pi is the period of this particular sine curve. So as the frequency changes, period also changes. We had 2 cycles per 2 pi, which means there are 2 frequency here is 2. And therefore the period is pi, which is half of 2 pi. Now if I change the frequency to say 4. Now you have 4 full cycles until 2 pi. Now what is the period here? You can see that one full cycle ends at pi by 2. So pi over 2 is the period for this particular function, which is nothing but 2 pi over 4. Because there are 4 full cycles, you divide 2 pi by 4 and you get the period. 2 pi divided by the frequency gives you the period.